So Julie Hansen. Julie is an award-winning author. She's an executive presence coach. She started her career as an actress, and how fun is that? And so she uh, took her acting in a different direction and is really helping people with their executive presence. And she wrote a book called Look Me in the Eye, and it was the top sales book in 2021. And her training has earned her medals for innovation, and she does virtual assessments and coaching, and she helps leaders really excel in their virtual presence area and in business. And Julie, we're so grateful that you're here with us today, and we're going to turn it over to you. Please, as Julie's talking, put your questions in chat, and then we'll make sure that there's time to answer them. And this is a topic that all of us are very interested in. We're interviewing so much, and some of us have even had AI interviews, right? And Julie, I mentioned that to you, and that can present even more challenges. So Julie, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Christy. And I'm just delighted to be here this morning. What a great program you put together. I perused some of the speakers as well, and lots of great content. Let me just share my screen here. This is just a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I've certainly been in the job interview process before myself. I've been in sales and sales training and presentation skills, executive presence skills, and not without some job switching here and there. It's a whole different game today. And so what I want to do is talk about how it can help you gain that competitive edge in those really critical, first interviews, which are typically virtual, and share just some of the secrets and the insider tips on how to really come across as credible and confident and competent and exceptional that you are on camera, which is no easy feat, and most people do not do it well. So there's really a great opportunity for people who seize this information and put it to work. So yes, encourage you to put your questions in chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. um, I'll just set the stage. I know some of you are, in the midst of the interview process, or just jumping in, or on the other side of it, perhaps. But it's a different world now than it's been probably in the past, 5 years, decade, where it used to be maybe a couple of interviews, mostly face to face, has turned into a longer process. Uh, I've heard a lot of horror stories. So maybe some people who, or maybe you yourself have been in an interview process in the double digits. But I love this title from Slate. Want a job? Cool. There's 17 interviews. And sadly, that's not as uncommon as it should be, right? And while much can be said about the lack of preparation or efficiency on the part of the company who is doing that interview, as someone who is looking for a job, we're sort of at their mercy. And because it's so easy to add more virtual interviews and to meet with more people, it's just has sort of piled on. And to Christy's point, there's the added um, drama of perhaps meeting with a bot, which is not really a skill that's in anyone's wheelhouse, right? So we're going to talk about how to navigate this new world. Because as you get through and you go through so many interviews, so many steps, most people's energy starts to drain. Their, whatever good habits they had initially start to fall off. And so it becomes, a real challenge to stay strong and present through the whole process. Forbes just came out with an article, and they said, I mean, certainly we're all there to talk about our experience and what we can offer, and what we can, our vision. But that real game changer that's making people stand out in the job market is those candidates' behavior and their leadership presence. And so that's really what we want to focus on is, how we shine a light on your leadership qualities and make sure they come across on camera, because that isn't something that just happens naturally, as you're going to find. So I would guess if we've got executives on this call, this is not the first chance that you've heard about executive presence. It's been around for a while. Sylvia Ann Hewitt has a great book on it. And she called it that missing link between merit and success. Because I think we all know you can have all the qualities and credentials and experience necessary, but that doesn't always move you up the ladder. It's this link, this gap between your experience and how people perceive you, right? And are you able to express confidence, credibility, authenticity, inspire that confidence in others? And certainly, this book was put out well before people were communicating virtually as much as they do. But virtual executive presence, which I've adopted and taken on as sort of a passion here because I think it's so necessary, is really just the ability to do all those things that maybe many of us have mastered in the face-to-face conversations and apply those when you're on camera. And it's a whole different game as you're going to learn here. So you may be thinking, gosh, do I have virtual executive presence? How would I know? Nobody's going to necessarily tell you, right? And it's a hard thing to diagnose by yourself because it really is about how others perceive you on their screen. So if I asked you, are you the same? Do you believe that you're the same credible, confident, authentic person when you get on video as you are if you're talking to somebody in person? I'm sure most of you would say yes. I don't turn into another person just because I'm sitting in front of a camera, right? However, if I were to ask you, do you think others perceive you as confident, credible, authentic, charismatic as you are in person when you're on video? You probably don't really know, do you? And that's problematic because um, these qualities of executive presence are, in fact, some of the most difficult qualities to convey virtually. It's very hard to convey credibility, confidence, authenticity, active listening, empathy. And if you think about it, you probably will recognize that in calls that you're on, that you don't, those qualities don't necessarily jump out at you in most people. And those happen to be the key qualities of executive presence. So you can see where there starts to be a problem as we are trying to convince others to believe in us. And perception is really reality on camera. I believe you're a confident, credible person, but if you don't appear that way on camera to me, I have nothing else to go on, right? And we really can't afford to be in the dark about how others see us, how interviewers, how business partners see us when we're on their screens. And so this is an opportunity to shed some light on that. And stick around the end because I have something that can help you accelerate that process and give you some light on that area and how you're coming across to take into the job market. So what we're going to talk about is why that executive presence maybe that you have in person doesn't necessarily transfer directly to the screen, how to master that first impression, which is when a lot of things are happening in your interviewer's mind, and we want to take advantage of that and set the stage for a positive experience, how to convey those very critical qualities of confidence, credibility, leadership on camera, and then how you can continue to work and develop your virtual executive presence as you go forward. So let me just start by just, level setting here. Communicating on camera is an unnatural act. Nobody's born knowing how to do this. As Christy mentioned, I worked as an actor, and actors aren't born knowing how to do it either. They are taught how to do it, which is something that we don't necessarily teach business people, which is unfortunate. Um, but it's a new skill. And as an actor, like most actors, and we have some actors on the call here, probably usually have a few in the crowd, and you typically start out on stage. So you're doing live theater and you're feeding off a live audience. It's very much like live sales or leadership where you've got that interaction, you can feel the energy, you've got scene partners, you can read their expressions. And then you go to audition for film or television. It's a whole different experience. So I had an audition for a little show you may have heard of, Law and Order. And I was real excited, and I just went in. It was, I just moved to New York. It was one of my first on-camera auditions, and I went in there, and they said action, and I just, I didn't know if I should stare at the camera, or I should look at the other person reading the lines in the room, or what I should do with my hands. And after the longest 15 seconds of my life, they said, "Cut, thank you. We'll be in touch." They were not in touch. And no one was in touch for several months until another actor friend finally said, have you thought about taking some on-camera uh, acting courses? And I was like, oh, no, is that what people do? And so, I did that and learned just, there's a set of techniques. Actors have been doing this for 50 years plus, and they've learned how to connect with people through the camera. That is what they do, and it is a skill. It is a learned skill. If I can learn it, you can learn it. And so I started to book some parts, and I had a little role in Sex and the City. And I say little, I mean little. But it was a blast. It was a hot show, and I was out there. So that was a lot of fun. There I am, looking very sad appropriately at a funeral scene. It was one of the few PG-rated episodes. So, uh, so that was a great learning experience that I needed to go through. And it's a new medium and it requires new skills. And what was interesting to me was, was teaching, in-person executive presence, in-person presentation skills. And when we switched to, after the pandemic and everyone went virtual, and I saw all these, companies just telling people, okay, just get a camera, get on Zoom, get on Teams, and just do what you did, but do it on camera. And no guidance, really, no effective guidance, a lot of ideas that somebody figured out just without any experience. And so it's kind of the Wild West out there. So I took what I learned as an actor and I translated into what it means for business people. How do we apply those skills that actors learn into the business world of virtual meetings, of creating, a video content in my book, Look Me in the Eye. And so it really is a very thorough how-to on, A to Z. How do we, when do I look at the camera? How do I look at the camera? What does it mean when the person on the other side of the screen is doing this? Or how do I get people to engage? And from that, built out on-demand course, coaching, and really started to dive into this area of virtual executive presence, which is very much focused on, that credibility, that confidence, those leadership qualities, and having those come across on camera. So what we're going to talk about today is, again, how to really make sure those skills don't necessarily transfer from in person to on camera. So how do we master them here? And let's start by talking about how to master that first impression, because those first impressions, especially in interviews or in sales, are so vital. And if you think about it, what happens on camera is uh, it's it's like you're an iceberg, right? And in an iceberg, you can see the top part, which looks pretty inviting, but if you saw the whole picture, you'd get a real different experience, right? Because you're taking away 80% of that information. And so the same thing happens when we get on a Zoom call. 80% of our body language, our in-person energy, all that communicate so many things to people is gone. So all we're left with is this 20% that they are forming all their opinions from. And if you don't know what your 20% is saying, that's a real problem, right? Because it is saying something to them, and it better be saying what you want them to want them to hear. So we want to manage that most of all. So when I do assessments, which is Christy had mentioned, I do assessments on, your virtual stage. How is every little thing in that? What does it say to me? What does it say to your audience? How credible are you? How confident? What is your first impression like? Because we get so focused on our words, but I'm sure some of you have seen this information before, but just to reinforce that when we receive communication, especially initially, 55% of it comes from our physical being, right? 38% from the sound, the tone, the quality of our voice, and 7% from the words. Now, of course, if your words are gibberish, it doesn't matter how great your body language is, right? But this is really important when you first meet someone to think about how they are receiving you, how they are interpreting what they're seeing. And a lot of it has to do not with just the words. And certainly, make sure your words are the best possible words, but you can be sure that so are your competitors, right? But what they may not be doing is this area of really boning up their virtual executive presence. So in those first 7 to 15 seconds, there's a number of studies down on this. Some people say even less time. People decide if you're confident, if you're trustworthy, if you're likable, and how they're going to listen to you. Those are some pretty powerful decisions. I read a study about jurors, and most jurors, I can't remember the percentages, make up their mind in the opening argument of what their decision is going to be. Now they use the rest of the trial to sort of reinforce their decision, and that is how a lot of people, think, maybe not consciously, but that's what the process is. So we need to really manage that first impression so that we're not working necessarily uphill the rest of the way to try and recreate a better impression. So interestingly, if you break this down, studies show that it takes less than a second just by looking at someone's face to determine if they're competent, likable, aggressive, trustworthy. And looking at their face longer than that doesn't necessarily change people's opinion. So think about that, the power of our face. Now, unfortunately, what we see a lot of in virtual meetings is this face, which I like to call resting business face, right? It's just a blank kind of poker face. It doesn't give anything away. Are you happy to be here? Are you mad? What's going on? We don't know, right? I would say if your face has nothing to say, why are you on camera? Right? Why? That's the whole point. So that's one area where people often fall flat. And some of that has to do with we don't bring enough energy to the camera, and the camera takes away a big chunk of energy. And the first thing to go often with that energy is our facial expressions, right? We're just not that connected. We don't have that energy. In 20 seconds, complete strangers can pick up on whether someone's trustworthy, kind, or compassionate just by watching someone listen to another person talk. So by watching listening behavior. And think about what listening behavior looks like in virtual meetings. It looks a lot like that, right? How does that feel? Does that, I know this guy I'm sure he's listening really hard, but it doesn't feel like here's a word I say. So we get the screen starer, or we call the darter, which is looking, I'm watching this person, I'm watching Bill, I'm watching Anna, I'm watching, I want to see everybody's reaction. You can't see everyone's reaction on the camera. You will look like a crazy person trying to see everyone. Don't do it. So listening behavior, we don't look like we're listening. And in 30 seconds or more, after listening to people speak and where they're looking, uh, scientists found that we're more likely to believe statements by a speaker who looks at us directly compared to someone who looks away. So I'm much more likely to believe Jessica here in the bottom. And all these things you may think, well, that doesn't make, I mean, everybody knows it's virtual and it's hard. And I guarantee you, no interviewer is going to make excuses for you. Like your best friends might excuse your behavior, but interviewers aren't in the process of looking for excuses, right? These relationships are built on emotion. It's not logic. So don't try to make it a logical thing when it's not. So in terms of first impressions, it all starts with your virtual stage. If you think about it, if you were to walk into an in-person interview, you're not responsible for the surroundings, right? They don't hold you for, gosh, why is our office so dark? Or, you know, but everything in your virtual stage is on you, right? So you have to get that right. It has to be very intentional because, and I'll tell you, I do a series called Rate My Video where I look at executives' virtual executive presence and analyze it. And I just did one for a CEO of a $4 billion company. And he had one of the most depressing setups. There was a fire alarm in the back. There's like could see the ceiling. He may be the smartest man in the world, but I would never know he ran a $4 billion company by looking at his setup. If he was interviewing with me, I would think, does this person not notice how distracting that is? Do they not pay attention to details? All these things are going through people's minds, especially if they're looking for reasons to eliminate you, which, early on, they want to make it a manageable group to interview. So your virtual stage, everything in that, the sound, the lighting, the background. I'll just give you a couple of tips here. Obviously, professional, clutter-free background. It's the guy in the corner might be a really competent accountant, but I just would never use it, right? We want to set the right tone, which is professional. We want to aim for what's called a medium close-up, and this is what I see a lot of people just sort of fail at right off the beginning. And a medium close-up is really where, and I see a few folks in it, but, to kind of chest level up, maybe have like be able to put your hand above your head because you don't want too much space there. You don't want to be in what's called an extreme close-up, which is, you turn into sort of a floating head, and it also crosses into people's personal space, which you don't want. But this puts you in a nice area to be at eye level with someone, and perhaps use some gestures and look like a real person as opposed to a floating head. Very important, and I see executives make this mistake all the time. Set that camera at eye level. Eye level means uh, just what I said. You should be able to look at the camera, but take a screenshot of yourself looking at your camera and just look. Does it look like you're eye level? If I can see the ceiling in your background, you are not eye level, and I see that all the time. So there's a lot of confusion around that. And it's very important to be eye level with your audience because that conveys status. It's one of those kind of unspoken things that we kind of size people up in that first impression. And, if you're looking down, that conveys, superiority. If you're looking up, it conveys inferiority. So all of these subtle things are working together on your interviewer's mind to help them make a decision. So let's take a look at what confidence and credibility look like on camera and how we get there. So obviously, not a surprise that direct eye contact conveys confidence. We expect leaders to make eye contact with us. We don't expect them to look away. That projects, uncertainty or doubt. And leaders, in fact, tend to make more eye contact. And all these studies are from in person. What's going on today is probably a different story. But very, very powerful. Eye contact is an amazing power. And it's it's something that, as an actor, you learn very quickly, that the camera is the eyes of the audience. And so you may have seen a show where the actor suddenly looks at the camera and talks to you, like in, Wolf of Wall Street or Ferris Bueller. And it is it is very attention getting, isn't it? It is very powerful when someone puts that focus on you. And I think we forget about that power. It's called breaking the fourth wall. And it's a power that we have access to if we know how to strategically use it at the right times. And we can make someone feel like we are talking just to them. And the beauty of this on camera is that um, everyone will feel like you're talking just to them. So if you're on a call with, you don't have to scan the room constantly. You're talking to everyone, right? So it's a very personal experience. So that's called breaking the fourth wall, which some of you may be familiar with. A lot of television shows do it now, The Office and whatnot, but it brings you into their world. And so when people avoid the camera or they're constantly looking down, it's very hard to connect with you, and it doesn't show confidence. So, as I mentioned, we're also more likely to believe statements by speakers who look at us directly compared to those who look away. So, when we're saying something that we want people to, we want them to take to heart and we want them to believe, you're going to be more likely to believe it if I say it to the camera, like, it's like if you asked a kid if, did you eat that last cookie? And they're, no, right? As opposed to no, I didn't, right? It takes, there's something that we trust that when someone looks us in the eye. Uh, Experts have said in the past that it takes at least making eye contact 2/3 of the time during an initial relationship to build that relationship. And that's probably true of in person. I think it's more on camera because when you are in person, we know if you're looking at our desk, you're still engaged, right? We know you're still engaged. If you're looking anywhere but at the camera on a virtual call, we don't know what you're doing, but you have disengaged with us. Now, it doesn't mean you can't ever look away, but just keep that in mind because if you're not looking at the camera, you are not actively connecting with your audience. And they don't care why. They don't know why, and they don't care. And if they bother to think about it, they're not going to assign probably positive reasons to it, right? What do you think people are doing when they look away, right? Whatever you're worried about, they're worried about. There is one person you should never make eye contact with on video. Anybody know who that is? It's yourself. Never look at yourself on video. I would say to, don't turn your camera off, but hide your image. Because I'll tell you what happens is no one ever like looks at themselves and says, oh yeah, I look great. It's always like, oh my gosh, what am I? And then you try and fix whatever is going on and you've lost your connection with your audience. You're less confident. The time to fix anything is before you get on. And then your job is to be 100% present. That's your job, right? Nobody's looking at that straight hair, it doesn't matter. We want to stay focused. So there's this little, hopefully you can hide your image on Zoom. Teams is a little trickier. I can't remember what the trick is. Showing leadership with strategic eye contact. So here are some tips that, and I cover more in much more detail in the book, when to look at the camera, when to read body language, what it means. But some key points you can take away are at the start of the call. All right, I know you want to look at your audience and you can glance at them, but go right to the camera, like introduce yourself to the camera, right? Don't be introducing yourself to, hi, I'm Julie and I'm I'm here to talk to you about XYZ. No, that's, grab them right from the beginning, that first impression. When you're making a key point, you want them to remember something, say it to the camera and hold your gaze there. I'm going to say, I'm going to help you improve your virtual executive presence so you can land that next job. In acting, that's called holding the last beat, right? Very, very powerful. This is counterintuitive, I may know, but look at the camera when the other person, when the interviewer is speaking to you. And I know that sounds crazy, but again, that's how they're going to feel like you're listening. And look at the camera when you ask a question. I guarantee you, you will get a faster answer, and there won't be any uncertainty as to whether it was a question or not. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. So just those times can make a big difference. If you start thinking about, if you want to practice, there's some good times to start working on it. So when we talk about, showing credibility and building trust, which is what most interviewers are looking for, is people they can trust, right? One of the fastest ways to do that is through active listening. So Deloitte did a study of business leaders, and they found that they said the one thing you could do to build trust with them is to listen. Unfortunately, as we talk about, listening looks very different in virtual meetings than what we have been used to our entire life, right? So we're not going to suddenly change our expectations of what listening looks like just because we do virtual meetings once in a while. So we can't expect that. It's much like if you were out to, lunch with somebody and they suddenly got on their phone. That's what it's like. That's what it feels like. It's that bad. So we need to work on that. And it's our job. It's not natural. Again, it feels uncomfortable, but we're not here to feel comfortable. We're here to, make the other person feel comfortable, make the interviewer feel heard. I know they're an interviewer, but they still want to feel heard. The other thing is those small signals that we send when we're in person that you can hear, like the if someone else is talking. Those get lost on video because of the nature of the microphones. So you don't look interested, you don't sound interested, and those small vocal cues are lost. So I don't know that you're interested. So it's important to use virtual listening cues. And this is just to make sure the other person feels heard. Again, looking at the camera when the interviewer is speaking to you or someone else on the call is, and body language. I don't want you to go to full mime behavior, like what? Right? But just, the slight nodding, the tilting the head. Think about what you do when you're listening. Authentic facial expressions. What are they saying? Is it good? Is it bad? Does it amuse you? Don't, have your face activated enough through a good virtual, prep that you're able to be expressive, right? Summarizing what you heard is a good way also to acknowledge that. The other thing that hurts our trust is incongruent behaviors. We simply don't trust people whose words say one thing and their body language says something else. We don't, we don't think necessarily put that together, but there's something where they go, I don't know, I just don't trust them. It's like the newscasters. I don't know if they do this so much anymore, but like, smiling more on that disaster at 9, right? It's like, just doesn't doesn't quite fit, right? And you may think, well, that's unusual. And yet I see uh, so many people, and they'll start off a call and they'll say, it's really great to see you. And it's like, is it? It doesn't look like it's great to see me. It looks like you're at the dentist's office. Like, uh, you know, make sure you're congruent with, if you're happy to see somebody, again, face, vocal tone, which means to do that, you have to be very present, which takes some preparation, right? You have to not be focused on, how I look and, you have to, once you get on camera, it's like you have to just let go of a lot of things that you may have planned on. You can't hold on to things. And so, again, just being, that authenticity is going to come through. So, I want to share lastly here with you some virtual confidence crushers. that can really zap your confidence in interviews and help you navigate those. How many people like those silences, those awkward pauses? No, nobody likes those, right? It's like, oh my God. And what happens when, especially when we ask a question, right? You ask a question and it's just hanging there and it seems like forever. Well, when we're in person, we could see like either, people raising their hands, but we could see them contemplating asking. So it masked some of that fear. But now we just see a sea of blank faces. We don't know, none of those look like they're dying to answer my question, right? So what do? We jump in, answer our own question, right? Or we rush through and fill that space. And what we have to understand is that people are more passive on video. Even interviewers, perhaps, they're there to kind of, hear from you. So um, we have to not take that personally, and we have to understand the time difference in video. And I'll show you in a minute the timing here. But it's almost like, when we're in front of a screen, it's like, this is your show. Like, tell me about yourself. And if you ask a question and there's multiple people on the call, the more people on the call, the slower it is probably going to be to get an answer. But if you rush in and constantly fill that space, you will not have an engaging meeting, right? And they will let you fill in the space the rest of the meeting. So you sort of teaching them how you expect them to participate. So we have to really embrace that purposeful pause, I call it, because what we feel is happening as a uh, speaker is much different compared to what's happening to your listener. So let me give you an example. When I throw a question out there uh, and I don't get an answer, I think, oh my gosh, nobody's going to answer this. They think this is dumb, or, did they hear me? Should I say it again? Maybe I get it, and it seems like it's forever. What's happening on the listener side is totally different. So I want to walk you through kind of the timeline of what happens when you ask a question. So I ask a question. I say, so what is your biggest virtual interview challenge today? So I've asked a question. You're going to have to, you weren't expecting that question, right? You didn't have any preconceived thoughts about it. So you got to think, what do I think about that? And then you have to think, well, do I have an answer? You have to formulate something. And then you might think, should I share it? There's a bunch of people on this call. Maybe I don't want them to know that's my biggest challenge. And then you're thinking, oh, I bet Amber's going to answer this. And then you might get the pressure builds, and then you might think, okay, no one else is going to answer. I better jump in. And perhaps you have to unmute yourself. So that whole process can take about 17 seconds. Now, I'm not suggesting you wait 17 seconds after asking every question, but most people don't wait longer than 2, maybe 3 seconds. And they think it's longer than that, because I always say there's presenter time and there's audience time. And presenter time, you feel like it's just rushing, right? And so you think it's, you think those spaces are taking forever. And so you panic. So trust that your audience is not just sitting there with a blank face going, why isn't she talking? They're going through a process. So let them, it's very important that you allow them to go through that process so that you can have a high level conversation and get the information that you need, and also make them feel like, gosh, that was an engaging call. We had some back and forth, right? So very important concept. The other credibility or confidence crusher is having interviewers who are off camera, or as Christy said, talking to AI. It's not even a real person, right? This is acting. This is what acting is, folks. You're not an interviewer, an interviewee at that point. You're an actor, because that's what actors do. They talk to cameras when no one is there. And I just want to share with you why that's so uncomfortable and how to make that a little easier for you. So the problem is it's happening more and more. Around 1/3 of executives are choosing to keep their cameras off during virtual meetings. I don't know about interviews. I think that's maybe less, but depends on the group. So the reason this is so uncomfortable is because we are familiar with a very standard communication loop where we send a message, which means we say something. Uh, we ask a question, the other person interprets it, and they give us feedback in terms of an answer or even just body language, right? And now that whole communication loop is broken on camera because we say something and the other person interprets it, but we can't see them, so we don't see anything nonverbal. They don't necessarily say anything because maybe it wasn't a question, maybe it just I finished answering a statement, and we have to just keep going, right? And it's a really awkward situation where people end up, sort of in panic and anxiety, and so we speed up, we check in, like, does that make sense? Does that make sense? Constantly needing a validation, and we just get in these endless monologues because we're so uncomfortable with that silence. Again, if we can just stop and pause for, 5 seconds, um, and realize that, that helps our audience also retain what we're saying. So what I always try to remember is, as an actor, we learned, to apply this, it's called the act as if method, which is act as if they are right there listening. They are there, by the way, they are there. Um, and they are having the best possible reaction to whatever you're saying. And what that does is the that gives you the um, motivation to continue in the right energy. If I say something funny or, good, you're likely going to have an appropriate reaction to that. Just because I can't see it doesn't mean you're not having that reaction. And there's no downside to me assuming you're having the best possible reaction, right? Because it brings out the best in me, as opposed to thinking, oh, they hate this, they don't like it, which is where most presenters and interviewees go, right? We go down that rabbit hole. Um, so those are some ways to, show confidence, credibility, manage your first impression. Uh, I want to just reiterate here about a couple of things to take home for this. First, I want to share a horror story. My husband, who is a good sized company, and he was hiring a VP of sales, and he, like most uh, interviewers, he had a pretty good sized pool from the recruiting company that he worked with, and so he's kind of trying to get through those. But he met with I don't want to put this poor girl's picture up because it's not applies to her, but he met with a couple of candidates, and one was uh, in a hotel room with an unmade bed behind her, and he was just thought it was so uncomfortable and awkward that he didn't he didn't continue with her. Another guy was and he was a little younger, but he was in like this gaming chair. And he just thought, these just don't seem like serious people. Like these are attention to detail things. And he stopped the process with them. So we want to be sure to really, look at everything, right? Don't assume anything is going to get a pass because these people don't know you and they don't have any reason to give you a pass, especially in those initial stages. So set your virtual stage, analyze everything, use that strategic eye contact to show your leadership right at the start of the call, when you're making a strong point, when you're asking a question. Use those active listening cues. Even interviewers want to feel heard, right? So body language, facial expression, and just make sure that, your body language aligns with what you're saying. If you feel strongly about something, if you feel happy about something, let us see that. Uh, and certainly continue to embrace that pause. Don't let that panic you. Understand that there's something going on the other person's end. So in terms of developing your virtual executive presence, uh, I have two different suggestions for you here. Uh, Certainly, you should always record ourselves and review those recordings with some evaluation criteria. It's hard to do it on your own because we start to go down a rabbit hole of like, oh, I don't like my hair. I don't like. No, those aren't the things that matter. We're talking about what conveys trust, what conveys confidence, um, and what went well. Where can I improve? I have a self-evaluation form. If you get the book, which is on Amazon, you have access to that. So that's one way to do it. And then you can kind of use that as a guide because there's a chapter on eye contact. There's a chapter on interpreting body language. There's a chapter on gestures and, the meaning of those. So you can use that to sort of create an exercise plan to work on. Or you can do more of a fast track to improve your virtual executive presence, which is an assessment, some practice, and some private coaching with feedback with me. And so I wanted to do something special for you guys because I know it's a tough time for a lot of folks. And so I have a package that is the full virtual executive presence assessment, which rates you on confidence, credibility, virtual staging, first impressions, all the things you need to improve, what you did well, and also 45-minute coaching call to work on those things to get you on the right footing for those interviews. So that is half off for you guys with the code cleverly called half off. If you need the link, it's on my site, juliehansen.live, under Virtual Executive Presence Assessment. You can email me or reach out if I didn't quite put that on there. But this is a sample of the assessment. It's pretty thorough and it'll tell you how much eye contact you made, when you need to make it, if, what you need to change in your virtual stage. So I think it's proved really valuable. Most people don't see these things in themselves. Like I said, it's very hard to view yourself as someone else does on their screen. So you don't have to do it alone. I'm happy to help. You just schedule time with me and we'll get her done.
Okay, Julie, we've got quite a few questions, and then I
Okay,
have a
let's
few.
go.
But so let's see how many we can go through. So Hope asks, my eyes tend to dart around when I'm talking or thinking about my response. What are ways to consciously control and minimize that eye darting?
That's a great question. And there's nothing wrong with looking away to gather your thoughts. I do the same thing. What happens is people often forget to bring it back to the camera. So just get your thoughts, then bring it back to the person. It takes practice. All of this takes practice. We're developing new muscle memory, as it were. So practice in your less important virtual meetings so that you can do it without thinking about it when you are in an important interview.
And then what about virtual backgrounds? What are your thoughts on virtual backgrounds?
Virtual backgrounds, I prefer natural backgrounds. It communicates authenticity. That's not always possible, I understand. So virtual backgrounds, if that is the case, keep them very simple and neat, and find one that there isn't a lot of movement. It doesn't do a lot of funny things when you move. That's challenging. You may have to manage your movement and slow it down so you don't get that 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 effect of them kind of vibrating.
Okay, and then uh, John Horn asks, I have a tendency to put post-it notes off camera to remember things, and I'm guessing this is not a good strategy based on your feedback about eye contact.
No, it's a fine strategy. There's a whole chapter in the book on using scripts, I can't memorize everything. I don't know about you, but so the same idea, it's okay to look away. But it's how far you look away and how long you look away and when you look away. And so if you're just going to grab something, if you just need to glance at your note, fine, get it from the note. But there's a technique in the book called pause, script, camera. So it's pause, get what you need from the script, take it to the camera and say it. Don't say it while you're looking at what happens. A lot of people look at their notes and go, yeah, so what we can do is we can, raise your ROI. They'll continue to talk to their notes, right? So just bring it to the camera.
Okay, Ilio, you have a question, and then there's a bunch that are lining up in the chat.
Oh, it was just a follow-up. First of all, Julie, thank you. It was really great tips. When you are working in a nondescript office, and you're given the choice between the blurred background and choosing a virtual background that is, a office setting, which would you recommend between those? Because your point about authenticity resonates with me as well. So I'm just curious what you'd recommend in that scenario.
Yeah, and I forget where I read this, but I think the blurred backgrounds are, well, it's a good idea. I think it's a little too, I'm hiding something. And, it just gives off that aura, and I've heard that from a couple people. So I think just I mean, some virtual backgrounds are, if it's really lavish, I'm going to know it's not your office, right? And even not that. It's just if it can just be clean and nice, it doesn't have to be fancy, right?
Yeah, Ilio, I like that background with the bookcases. So somebody asks about speed. I saw on your post, and everyone, I recommend you sign up for Julie's newsletter because she gives out these posts. And yesterday was really interesting. It
Mm,
was the executive and like a multi-billion-dollar company, right? And
right.
you had some really great tips. But one of the things that you mentioned at the end was he went, kind of moderate speed, and all of a sudden he rushed through it.
Right.
Talk about speed a little bit.
Yes, yes. So if you think about how confident people speak, we don't expect them to suddenly start rushing and, they're in a hurry to finish up. And what this gentleman did, and what a lot of people do, is when they get to the end, they start to rush and it's like, and then he just kind of dropped everything. Like, you're done and, racing to a finish line. And keeping that that moderate, you don't want to talk unnaturally slow, but taking the time to emphasize what you want to emphasize, pause. There's never a time to rush, right? Even if you're running out of time, don't rush, right? It's better to cut some things out than try and rush through and fit them all in.
What about voice? I don't know, pitch, I guess.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because some people, when they're nervous, they go up an octave or two. What are your thoughts? Because you know what, I thought it was interesting. So much is physical body language. 7%, only 7% words. 38% voice.
Right.
That's big. So
It
how do
is.
you manage that?
Yeah, so another piece of it that we didn't get into today, but it is very important. And a lot of what happens vocally has to do with your energy and um, and being in a not a nervous state, but an engaged state, right? And so what happens is people's voice changes or gets tight or gets high because they're nervous and what their body is doing is they're shutting down. And so in the book and when I practice with people, I have a virtual warm up that, as an actor, like, that all those things are connected, your voice, your body, your energy. And so, right before you're going on camera, or you're going on stage, you're nervous. And if you just sit there and don't move, everything is going to freeze up. It tightens up, right? Your voice tightens up and everything gets hard and feels weird. So you have to keep that energy moving. Otherwise, it's going to freeze up into tension and show up in your voice. So, and vocal warm-ups are really important for that too. Um, don't just jump on a call and have those be the first words you've said all day, right?
Okay, and one last question, then we're out
Yeah.
of time, is what about telling the interviewer that you're going to take notes
I,
while
I think that's fine. Um, yeah, I don't, there's a lot of note apps now, and that might be more, that will help you stay more engaged if they're open to that. Because otherwise, we're going to see this view of you the whole time, and you may get a
Yeah,
lot of
and it breaks
information.
rapport, don't you think?
Oh, it
I
totally
mean,
breaks.
it's like that rapport that's so precious and so difficult to engage.
Right,
It's
right.
interesting. Well, Julie, awesome points. Thank you so much. I think the book seems like a really good investment. And so thank you. So appreciate it. Please reach out. We're going to send the recording out. We'll send your link to your website. And I encourage people to sign up for Julie's newsletter. I find that it's really valuable. I watch all your videos and I think they're really great takeaways. So thank you.